A husband abandoned his pregnant wife in a completely empty trailer in the middle of nowhere. No food, no water, no electricity, and drove away with everything. She was 9 months pregnant. Alone. Miles from help. She gave birth alone in that trailer. But what she built from that empty space became a movement that saved 15,000 women. Comment what city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Rural Nebraska, USA. The trailer sat in the middle of a dried-up cornfield in rural Nebraska, surrounded by nothing but flat land and empty sky for miles in every direction. It was small, maybe 200 square feet, with faded blue aluminum siding and a roof covered in rust spots. The kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. That's where Jason Miller left his pregnant wife, Emma, on a scorching summer afternoon. Emma stood in the doorway watching Jason load his pickup truck with their belongings: the microwave, their suitcases, the electric fan, even the battery-powered radio she'd bought at a garage sale. "Jason, you're taking everything," Emma said quietly, one hand on her 8 months pregnant belly. "I need these things where I'm going," Jason replied without looking at her. "Where are you going?" "Away. That's all you need to know." Emma watched him take the cooler with their food, the plastic jugs of water, the first aid kit. He was methodical, like he'd planned this carefully. "What about me? What about the baby?" Jason finally stopped and turned to face her. His expression was completely blank. "You'll figure something out. You're resourceful. I'm 9 months pregnant. In the middle of nowhere. With nothing. Not nothing. You've got the trailer. The trailer is completely empty. There's no electricity. No water. No furniture. Nothing. Then I guess you better start figuring things out fast." Emma felt surreal, like she was watching this happen to someone else. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't want this life. I never wanted kids. You trapped me." "I didn't trap you. We're married. We decided together." "You decided. I went along with it because you wouldn't shut up about it. But I'm done. I'm 32 years old and I'm not wasting my life playing house with a woman I don't even love anymore and a kid I never wanted." Each word hit Emma like a physical blow. "You don't mean that." "I absolutely mean it. Every word." Jason closed the tailgate of his truck. "Goodbye, Emma. Good luck with the kid." He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away across the dusty field, leaving Emma standing in front of an empty trailer in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Emma stood there until the truck disappeared completely from view, leaving only a dust trail that slowly settled back to earth. Then she turned and looked at what Jason had left her with. The trailer door hung open. Inside was exactly what she'd said: nothing. The previous occupant, whoever that had been, had stripped it completely. No furniture. No appliances. No curtains. Not even light fixtures in the ceiling sockets. Just 4 bare walls, a stained linoleum floor, a tiny bathroom with a toilet and sink that didn't work, and a kitchen area with empty counters and disconnected plumbing. Emma walked through the small space, her footsteps echoing. The trailer smelled like mildew and abandonment. She checked every cabinet, every closet. Completely empty. She tried the faucets. No water. She flipped the light switches. No electricity. She looked outside. The cornfield stretched in every direction, dead stalks from last season, never replanted. No farmhouse in sight. No road nearby except the dirt track Jason had driven down. No power lines. No signs of civilization except this forgotten trailer sitting alone in the middle of failed farmland. Emma sat down on the floor, carefully, because her pregnant belly made sudden movements difficult, and tried to assess her situation rationally. She was 8 months pregnant. Due in less than 4 weeks. She had the clothes she was wearing, a maternity dress, sandals, and underwear. She had nothing else. Jason had taken her phone, her wallet, her identification, everything. The afternoon sun beat down on the metal roof, turning the trailer into an oven. Emma was thirsty. very thirsty, and she had no water. She was hungry, and she had no food, and she had no way to call for help. For the first time since Jason had started packing the truck, Emma allowed herself to panic. Her breathing quickened. Her heart raced. Tears started flowing. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her unborn baby. "What am I going to do?" But crying wasn't going to solve anything. Emma forced herself to take deep breaths, to calm down, to think. First priority: water. She couldn't survive more than a few days without it. And she was already dehydrated from the heat. Emma walked outside and surveyed the property. The trailer sat on concrete blocks. Underneath, the ground was dirt and dead grass. No well. No water source visible. But then Emma noticed something. About 50 yards from the trailer, there was a slight depression in the land, an old drainage ditch, maybe. And in the ditch, there was something green. Living plants. Where there are living plants, there might be water. Emma walked, waddled, really, her pregnant body making movement awkward, toward the ditch. The afternoon heat was brutal. Sweat poured down her face. Her mouth felt like sandpaper. When she reached the ditch, she found exactly what she'd hoped for, a tiny trickle of water running along the bottom. Barely more than dampness, but it was water. The plants growing there were wild, prairie grasses and some kind of broad-leafed plant Emma didn't recognize. But they were thriving, which meant the water was consistent. Emma knelt awkwardly and cupped her hands, collecting the tiny trickle. It tasted muddy and warm, but it was wet. She drank several handfuls, knowing she should probably boil it but having no way to do so. At least she wouldn't die of thirst today. Next priority: shelter from the heat. The trailer was unbearable in the afternoon sun. Emma returned to the trailer and examined it more carefully. The windows were stuck, painted shut or warped. But she managed to force one open, creating a crossbreeze when she propped open the door. It helped slightly. The trailer went from unbearable to merely miserable. Emma sat on the floor in the slight breeze and tried to think about what came next. Food. She needed food. But there was nothing growing in the dead cornfield. Nothing she could see in any direction. Shelter. The trailer provided that, barely. But she had nothing to sleep on. No blankets. Nothing soft. Communication. She had no way to contact anyone. No phone. No computer. She didn't even know where the nearest town was or how far away. Medical care. She was 8 months pregnant. She needed prenatal care. She needed to be near a hospital for when labor started. And she had access to none of it. Emma put her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her situation. Jason had left her to die. That was clear now. He'd chosen the most remote location possible, an abandoned trailer in the middle of nowhere, and stripped her of every resource. He expected her to either die here or be so desperate that she'd, what? Crawl back to him begging? No, Emma said out loud. No, I won't do that. I won't give him that satisfaction. If Jason expected her to fail, then she'd prove him wrong. Emma didn't know how yet. But she knew she would. She had to. For her baby. As the sun began to set, Emma explored further from the trailer. The cornfield extended for what looked like miles. But in one direction, she noticed something: tire tracks through the dead stalks. Old tracks, barely visible, but they led somewhere. Emma followed them as far as she dared before darkness fell. The tracks led toward a slightly raised area on the horizon. Was that trees? A windbreak, maybe, which would indicate a farmhouse. She'd investigate tomorrow. For now, she needed to get back to the trailer before she couldn't find her way in the dark. Emma returned to the trailer as the last light faded. Without electricity, the inside was pitch black. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She felt her way to a corner, sat down with her back against the wall, and tried to get comfortable. Her back ached. Her ankles were swollen. The baby was pressing on her bladder constantly. and she was terrified. Emma had been raised in comfort, middle-class suburb, good schools, college education. She'd worked as a dental hygienist until her pregnancy made the physical demands too difficult. She'd never camped, never hunted, never learned wilderness survival. And now she was alone in an empty trailer in the middle of nowhere, pregnant, with no resources and no help coming. "I'm scared," Emma whispered to her baby. "I'm so scared. But I promise you, I promise, I'm going to figure this out. You're going to be born healthy and safe. I don't know how, but I'll make it happen." The baby kicked, hard, as if in response. Emma smiled despite everything. "You're strong. I can feel it. We're going to need that strength." She dozed fitfully that night, waking constantly. From discomfort, from fear, from the sounds of the prairie at night that she didn't recognize. When dawn finally came, Emma was exhausted, dehydrated, hungry, and even more pregnant than she'd felt the day before. But she was also determined. She walked back to the trickle of water and drank as much as she could. Then she followed the old tire tracks toward the tree line on the horizon. It took her over an hour of difficult walking. The heat was already building, her pregnant body was slow and awkward, and she had to rest frequently. But eventually, Emma reached the trees. And behind the trees, she found something that made her cry with relief. An old abandoned farmhouse. It was in terrible condition, roof partially collapsed, windows broken, porch rotting away. But it was something. Shelter that was better than the trailer. And where there had been a farmhouse, there had been infrastructure. Emma searched the property. Behind the house, she found the collapsed remains of a barn. Near that, a hand pump, the old-fashioned kind that drew water from a well. With trembling hands, Emma worked the pump. At first, nothing. Then a cough and sputter. Then rusty, brown water. She kept pumping. The water gradually ran clearer. Emma cupped her hands and drank. It tasted better than the ditch water, cleaner, cooler. She'd found a reliable water source. Emma continued exploring. In the collapsed barn, she found old farm equipment, rusted and broken. But also, tools. A shovel. A hammer. Some nails in a can. A coil of wire. In the farmhouse, she found debris but also old bottles, some dishes that had somehow survived, a metal bucket, rags that might once have been curtains. It wasn't much. But it was more than nothing. Emma spent the rest of the day carrying useful items back to the trailer. The bucket, the dishes, the tools, some pieces of metal and wood that might be useful. By evening, she had a small collection of salvaged materials. And she had a plan beginning to form. If she was going to survive here, if her baby was going to survive, she needed to create systems. Water collection. Food sources. Proper shelter. And somehow, a way to signal for help or make contact with civilization. Emma didn't know how to do any of those things. But she was smart. She could learn. She could adapt. She had to. Because the alternative was death. Hers and her baby's. And Emma refused to let Jason win. Emma established a routine out of necessity. Each morning, she'd walk to the abandoned farmhouse, a journey that was becoming harder as her pregnancy advanced, and pump water. She'd fill the metal bucket, carry it back to the trailer, and ration it throughout the day. She'd also search the surrounding area for anything edible. The prairie offered little, some wild berries that made her stomach hurt when she tried them, prairie grass that was inedible, occasional insects she couldn't bring herself to eat despite her growing hunger. On the fourth day of being alone, Emma found something unexpected. Behind the collapsed barn, hidden under overgrown vegetation, there was a root cellar, a underground storage space that old farmhouses used before refrigeration. Emma cleared away the rotted wooden door and climbed down carefully. Inside, it was cool and dark. And there, on shelves covered in dust and cobwebs, were dozens of old mason jars. Most were empty or contained things that had spoiled decades ago. But Emma found 5 jars that still looked sealed, home-canned vegetables from whoever had lived here long ago. The seals were intact, the contents preserved. Emma knew enough about canning to know this could be dangerous, botulism, spoilage. But she also knew she was starving. Her baby needed nutrition. She opened one jar, green beans. They smelled okay. Emma ate them slowly, carefully, waiting to see if she'd get sick. She didn't. The canning had held. Those 5 jars became Emma's lifeline. She rationed them carefully, 1 jar every 3 days. It wasn't enough calories, not nearly enough for a pregnant woman, but it was something. Emma also discovered wild prairie turnips, tough, stringy roots that grew scattered across the field. They tasted awful raw, but they were edible. She used the metal bucket to boil them over a small fire. She'd learned to start using dried grass and wood scraps, using the matches she'd found in a drawer at the farmhouse. She was surviving. Barely. But survival wasn't enough. Emma's due date was approaching, and she still had no way to get help. She'd tried walking in different directions from the trailer, looking for roads or houses. But the prairie stretched endlessly. After walking for hours in one direction, she'd have to turn back before exhaustion and dehydration became dangerous. She was trapped. One afternoon, as Emma rested in the shade of the trailer, she noticed something she'd missed before: tire tracks leading away from the trailer in a direction she hadn't explored yet. These tracks were newer than the ones to the farmhouse, not fresh, but not ancient either. Emma followed them. They led through the dead cornfield for over a mile, then joined a dirt road. The road was barely visible, overgrown with prairie grass, but it was there. A real road that led somewhere. Emma's heart raced. This was a way out. If she could walk far enough down this road, she'd eventually find civilization. But the road stretched to the horizon with no buildings visible. It could be 5 miles to the nearest house. It could be 20. And Emma was 9 months pregnant now, exhausted from malnutrition, barely surviving each day. If she started walking and didn't find help before dark, she might not make it back to the trailer. She might go into labor on the side of the road with no help. Emma stood at the edge of that road, torn between desperate hope and practical fear. Finally, she made a decision. She'd prepare. Gather strength. Wait until she had a clear, cool morning. And then she'd walk as far as necessary to find help. But first, she needed to be ready for the baby. Because labor could start at any moment. Emma spent the next days preparing for childbirth in the most primitive conditions imaginable. She didn't know exactly what she'd need, but she tried to think through what birth would require: a clean space, something to cut the umbilical cord with, cloth to wrap the baby, water to clean them both. From the farmhouse, Emma salvaged more items: an old knife, which she sharpened on concrete, rags that she boiled to sterilize, a larger pot she could use to heat water. She created a makeshift birthing area in the cleanest corner of the trailer. She lined it with grass she'd dried in the sun to create a softer surface. She stored boiled water in mason jars. She practiced how she'd position herself if labor started. It was terrifying. Emma had planned to give birth in a hospital with doctors and painkillers and modern medicine. Instead, she was going to deliver in an empty trailer, alone, with nothing but salvaged junk and prairie water. "Please don't come yet," Emma whispered to her baby as another practice contraction hit. Braxton Hicks, she hoped, not real labor. "Please wait until I can get us to help." But babies come on their own schedule. On what Emma estimated was about 10 days after Jason had left her, though she'd lost track of exact time, her water broke in the middle of the night. Emma woke to wetness and the unmistakable sensation of labor beginning. "No," she said out loud. "No, no, no. Not yet. Not here." But her body didn't care about her protests. Contractions started, mild at first, then gradually building in intensity and frequency. Emma moved to her prepared corner, breathing through the pain, trying to remember everything she'd read about childbirth when she was still living a normal life with prenatal care and birth classes. Labor progressed through the night. Emma had never experienced pain like this. Wave after wave of contractions that left her gasping and crying out into the empty trailer. There was no relief. No epidural. No nurse holding her hand and telling her she was doing great. Just Emma, alone, in agony, trying to bring her baby into the world in the most hostile circumstances imaginable. As dawn broke, the contractions were coming constantly. Emma could feel the baby moving down. It was time to push. Emma braced herself and pushed with everything she had. Again. And again. Screaming with effort and pain until her voice gave out. And then, finally, impossibly, a cry. A thin, angry cry of a newborn baby. Emma reached down with shaking hands and lifted her daughter, it was a girl, onto her chest. The baby was tiny, covered in vernix and blood, but she was alive. Breathing. Crying. "Hi," Emma sobbed. "Hi, baby. I'm your mama. You're okay. We're okay." With the sterilized knife, Emma cut the umbilical cord. She cleaned the baby as best she could with the boiled water and rags. She wrapped her in the cleanest cloth she had. The baby stopped crying and looked at Emma with unfocused newborn eyes. "I'm going to call you Grace," Emma whispered. "Because you're a miracle. You survived. We both survived." Emma delivered the placenta, cleaned herself up as well as possible, and then just held Grace skin to skin, marveling that they were both alive. She'd done it. Against impossible odds, she'd given birth alone in an abandoned trailer, and both she and the baby had survived. But survival was only the beginning. Now Emma had a newborn to keep alive with no supplies, no food beyond what she could scavenge, no medical care. The enormity of the challenge ahead threatened to overwhelm her. But as Grace nursed for the first time, Emma's body somehow knowing what to do even if Emma's mind was terrified, she made herself a promise. "We're going to make it," Emma told her daughter. "I don't know how yet. But we're going to survive this. And we're going to build something from it. I promise you." The first days with a newborn in the trailer were the hardest thing Emma had ever experienced. She was recovering from childbirth with no medical care, no painkillers, no postpartum support. Her body ached. She was exhausted beyond comprehension. And she had a newborn who needed constant care. Breastfeeding was the one thing that worked in their favor. Grace could eat without Emma needing to find food. But Emma herself was starving, and she knew her milk supply would suffer if she didn't get more nutrition. The canned vegetables were gone. Emma was down to prairie turnips and whatever else she could forage. It wasn't enough. Grace was only 5 days old when Emma realized she had to act. If she waited any longer, she'd be too weak to walk for help. And Grace needed more than this trailer could provide: medical care, proper nutrition for Emma so she could breastfeed adequately, safety. Emma created a sling from fabric she'd salvaged and secured Grace against her chest. She filled the bucket with water from the farmhouse pump. And at dawn, she started walking down the overgrown dirt road, away from the trailer. She had no idea how far she'd have to walk. But she knew she couldn't stay in the trailer any longer. Emma walked through the morning, resting frequently. Grace slept against her chest. The sun climbed higher. Emma's feet hurt. Her postpartum body protested every step. But she kept moving. After what felt like hours, Emma crested a small rise and saw something that made her cry with relief. A fence. A maintained fence with barbed wire strung properly. Which meant active farmland. Which meant people. Emma followed the fence line until she saw a house in the distance. A real, occupied house with a truck parked outside. She'd found civilization. Emma walked up the long driveway and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, took one look at Emma, dirty, exhausted, clearly postpartum, holding a newborn, and immediately pulled her inside. "Oh my God, are you okay? What happened?" And Emma, finally safe, finally found, finally able to get help for her baby, broke down completely and told her everything. The woman who answered the door was named Susan Hendricks, and she didn't waste time with too many questions. She sat Emma down, brought her water and food, called 911, and wrapped both Emma and baby Grace in clean blankets while they waited for the ambulance. "You walked how far with a 5-day-old baby?" Susan asked, incredulous. "I don't know exactly. Miles. I had to. We were going to die in that trailer." "Your husband just left you there? Pregnant?" With nothing. Yes. Susan's expression hardened. That's not just abandonment. That's attempted murder. The ambulance arrived, and paramedics immediately assessed both Emma and Grace. Emma was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Grace was underweight but otherwise healthy considering the circumstances. They were transported to the regional hospital in North Platte, about 40 miles from where Susan lived. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around them. Emma received 4 fluids, nutrition, medical care. Grace was examined thoroughly by a pediatrician. "You gave birth alone?" the doctor asked Emma, shaking his head in amazement. "In an abandoned trailer with no medical supplies?" "I didn't have a choice. You and your baby are extraordinarily lucky to be alive. Do you understand that? Women die in childbirth in hospitals with full medical support. What you did, surviving that birth alone, keeping both of you alive for days afterward, that's remarkable." A social worker named Teresa Martinez came to interview Emma once she was stable. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions about what happened. The police will want to speak with you as well. Your husband abandoned you in a remote location while you were pregnant. That's a serious crime." Emma told the whole story. Jason's growing resentment, the sudden decision to leave, being stripped of everything and left in an empty trailer, the struggle to survive, giving birth alone. Teresa's expression grew more horrified with each detail. "Emma, this is one of the worst cases of spousal abandonment I've ever encountered. The sheriff's department is already looking for your husband. He'll be charged with multiple felonies." "I don't care about him," Emma said, looking at Grace sleeping in the hospital bassinet. "I just want to make sure my daughter is safe and has what she needs." "We'll make sure of that. In the meantime, you'll both stay here until you're medically cleared. Then we'll figure out next steps: housing, resources, legal proceedings." Over the following days, Emma's story spread. A nurse mentioned it to a friend. That friend posted about it on social media. Local news picked it up. "Pregnant woman abandoned in trailer gives birth alone, walks miles to safety with newborn." The story went viral. People were outraged by Jason's cruelty and amazed by Emma's survival. Donations started pouring in. Strangers sent money, baby supplies, clothes for Emma. A local church offered temporary housing. A law firm offered to represent Emma pro bono in divorce proceedings and criminal charges against Jason. The sheriff's department located Jason in Colorado. He was arrested and extradited back to Nebraska to face charges: spousal abandonment, child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and attempted manslaughter. "He claims he didn't think you'd actually stay in the trailer," the prosecutor told Emma. "He says he thought you'd figure out how to get help right away. But his actions speak otherwise. He took every resource, left you in the most remote location possible, and didn't contact anyone to check if you were alive." "He wanted me gone," Emma said simply. "Whether I died or just disappeared, he didn't care which." "Well, he's going to face significant prison time. That's guaranteed." But Emma found she didn't have much energy to hate Jason or focus on revenge. She was too busy with something else: understanding what had happened to her in that trailer. During the weeks Emma recovered at the hospital and then in temporary housing provided by the church, she couldn't stop thinking about her time in the trailer. She'd been left with literally nothing. No food, no water, no supplies, no resources. Just an empty metal box in the middle of nowhere. And somehow, she'd survived. She'd found water. She'd scavenged food. She'd built a fire. She'd created a birthing space. She'd delivered her own baby. She'd kept both of them alive. "How did I do that?" Emma asked Teresa during one of their check-ins. "I'm not a survivalist. I've never camped. I didn't know how to do any of those things." "Necessity," Teresa said. "When you have no choice, you find capabilities you didn't know existed." "But it was more than that. I had to think differently. I couldn't just accept that the situation was hopeless. I had to look at everything around me, the trailer, the farmhouse, the prairie, and ask, What can this become? What can I make from this? That's creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. It's more than that, Emma said, the idea crystallizing. It's about seeing potential where others see nothing. About building something functional from whatever exists, no matter how inadequate it seems. Emma started writing down everything she'd learned during her time in the trailer. How to find water sources in seemingly dry landscapes, what wild plants were edible, and how to identify them, how to create fire with minimal materials, how to repurpose found objects into useful tools, how to sterilize materials without modern equipment, how to create shelter improvements with scavenged supplies, how to maintain hope and mental resilience in impossible situations. As she wrote, Emma realized something profound. She'd gained skills and knowledge that most people would never have. She'd been forced to learn survival in the most brutal way possible. And that knowledge was valuable. There are other women out there, Emma told Teresa one day. Women in desperate situations. Maybe not as extreme as mine, but desperate. Women who need to create something from nothing. Who need to survive with minimal resources. Who need to solve impossible problems. That's true. Poverty, homelessness, domestic violence. There are thousands of women facing survival situations every day. What if I could teach them what I learned? Not just survival skills, but the mindset. How to look at nothing and see possibility. How to build when you have no materials. How to keep going when everything seems hopeless. That's an interesting idea. What are you thinking? I don't know yet. But I know my experience can't be for nothing. If I went through all that and don't use it to help others, then Jason wins. He tried to destroy me and instead he accidentally taught me something invaluable. And I want to share it. Teresa smiled. That's not just survival, Emma. That's transformation. Turning your trauma into purpose. Maybe. But it's also practical. I need income. I need a future for Grace. And I have skills now that are actually useful. I just need to figure out how to share them. Over the coming weeks, as Emma continued to recover and adjust to life with a newborn, an idea took shape. She would create workshops teaching women extreme resource management and survival skills. Not wilderness survival. Most women weren't going to be abandoned in the prairie. But urban and rural survival for women in poverty or crisis. She'd teach how to stretch minimal resources, creative problem solving with no money, finding and repurposing materials, basic skills everyone should know. Fire, water, shelter, mental resilience and hope, maintenance, building something functional from nothing. Emma pitched the idea to the church that was hosting her. They loved it and offered their community center as a teaching space. We see women in crisis all the time, the pastor told Emma. Single mothers, domestic violence survivors, women who've lost everything. They need exactly what you're offering, practical skills and hope. Emma created her first workshop, Building from Nothing, Survival Skills for Women in Crisis. She expected maybe 5 or 6 women to show up. 23 came. They ranged from their late teens to 60s. Some were homeless. Some were fleeing abuse. Some were just desperately poor and looking for any advantage they could get. Emma taught them everything she'd learned. She brought in materials she'd salvaged from the trailer and farmhouse to demonstrate. She walked them through her thinking process, how she'd assessed situations, identified resources, created solutions. But the most powerful part of the workshop wasn't the practical skills. It was Emma's story. I was left pregnant in an empty trailer with nothing, Emma told the group. No food, no water, no supplies. I should have died. My baby should have died. But we didn't. Because I refused to accept that nothing meant hopeless. I looked at everything around me and asked, what can this become? And I built survival from scraps and determination. If I can do that, if I can give birth alone in a trailer and keep us both alive, then you can survive whatever situation you're facing. You have more strength than you know. You just have to learn how to access it. The women hung on every word. Several were crying. After the workshop, Woman after woman approached Emma to share their own stories and thank her for showing them possibility. "I've been living in my car with my 2 kids," one woman said. "I thought we were doomed. But you showed me there are resources everywhere if I know how to look. I can do this. I left my abusive husband last week with nothing but the clothes on my back," another woman said. "I was terrified. But you survived something even worse. If you can do it, maybe I can too." Emma realized she'd stumbled onto something important. Not just practical skills, but hope. Proof that survival was possible, even from the most desperate starting point. Word of Emma's workshop spread quickly through networks of women in crisis, domestic violence shelters, homeless services, church assistance programs, social services. Within months, Emma was running workshops weekly, each one full with wait lists. The church gave her a small stipend for teaching, enough to rent a modest apartment and buy necessities for Grace. It wasn't much, but it was independence. Emma refined her curriculum based on feedback and needs she observed. She added modules on creating habitable space in vehicles, for women living in cars, making the most of shelter resources, legal rights and resources for abandoned women, improvising baby care with minimal supplies, maintaining hygiene and health without normal amenities, mental and emotional survival strategies, building community support networks. But Emma also added something unexpected. She started taking women back to the trailer. She'd negotiated with the property owner to keep using the trailer as a teaching site. Once a month, Emma would take a small group of women out to that empty trailer in the prairie and show them exactly how she'd survived. "This is where I was left," Emma would say, standing in the doorway. Empty. Nothing. It looked impossible. Then she'd walk them through every solution she'd found: the water source, the farmhouse with salvaged materials, the root cellar, the fire building technique, the improvised tools. "I want you to see that even from this, from literally nothing, you can build survival. You can create what you need. It won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. But it's possible." These field trips were transformative for participants. Seeing the actual place, understanding the reality of what Emma had faced and overcome, made her lessons tangible and believable. "If Emma can survive this," participants would say to each other, "I can survive my situation." The program Emma had created, she called it Phoenix Project, Rising from Nothing, began attracting attention beyond Nebraska. A journalist from NPR came to interview Emma and profile the program. The story aired nationally, reaching millions of people. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reached out wanting to attend Emma's workshops or learn her techniques. Organizations asked if she could train their staff. Foundations offered funding to expand the program. Emma was simultaneously thrilled and overwhelmed. Grace was still an infant, Emma was still recovering from her trauma, and suddenly she had a national platform. Teresa, the social worker who'd become Emma's mentor and friend, helped her navigate the rapid growth. "You need to think strategically," Teresa advised. "You can't personally teach every woman who needs this. But you can train others to teach your methods. You can create a curriculum that can be replicated." "How do I do that?" "Start by documenting everything. Create a training manual. Then identify partner organizations in different cities who can host Phoenix Project workshops. Train facilitators to lead them. Scale the model." It seemed impossible. But Emma had done impossible before. Over the following months, Emma worked with Teresa and a small team of volunteers to create a comprehensive Phoenix Project curriculum. Detailed lesson plans, materials lists, facilitator training guides, participant workbooks. They piloted the Train the Trainer model with 3 organizations in other states: a women's shelter in Detroit, a homeless services agency in Phoenix, and a rural social services organization in Appalachia. The results were powerful. Facilitators who'd been trained by Emma reported that the program was transforming how their clients approached survival and problem-solving. Women who were completely shut down and hopeless are now actively problem-solving and finding creative solutions, reported the Detroit facilitator. Emma's story and methods give them a framework for action instead of despair. Within 2 years of giving birth in that empty trailer, Emma's Phoenix Project was operating in 12 cities across 8 states, serving over 500 women annually. Emma had also become a reluctant public figure. She was invited to speak at conferences on poverty, homelessness, and women's issues. Her story was featured in magazines and news programs. She always felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not a hero," she'd insist. "I'm just someone who survived. And who wants other women to know survival is possible." But others saw her differently. They saw a woman who'd been left to die and had instead built something that was saving others. Jason's criminal trial became national news due to Emma's prominence. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison. At the sentencing, Emma gave a victim impact statement. She'd thought about what to say for weeks. "Jason tried to erase me," Emma said, looking directly at her ex-husband for the first time since he'd driven away from that trailer. "He took everything from me and left me in the most desperate circumstances imaginable, hoping I'd disappear. Through death or desperation, it didn't matter which. But I didn't disappear. I survived. And more than that, I took the absolute worst experience of my life and turned it into something that helps hundreds of women every year. Women who were facing their own impossible situations and who needed to know that survival is possible. So Jason, you failed. You tried to destroy me and instead you accidentally created something meaningful. The Phoenix Project exists because of what you did to me. Every woman we help is proof that your cruelty had the opposite effect you intended. I don't forgive you. I don't need to. You're irrelevant to my life now. But I want you to know that you lost. And I won." Jason showed no emotion during her statement. But Emma didn't care. She'd said what she needed to say. After the trial, Emma returned to her work with renewed focus. Grace was now a toddler, and Emma had built a stable life. Modest apartment, reliable income from Phoenix Project, a community of supportive friends and colleagues. But she kept thinking about that trailer. The place where she'd been abandoned. The place where she'd survived. The place where, in some strange way, she'd discovered who she really was. Emma made a decision. She contacted the property owner and made an offer to purchase the trailer and the surrounding land. "Why would you want to buy that?" the owner asked, baffled. "Because it's part of my story. And I want to make sure it can continue being part of other women's stories." Emma used donations and savings to buy the property. Then she did something unexpected with it. Word of Emma's workshop spread quickly through networks of women in crisis, domestic violence shelters, homeless services, church assistance programs, social services. Within months, Emma was running workshops weekly, each one full with waitlists. The church gave her a small stipend for teaching, enough to rent a modest apartment and buy necessities for Grace. It wasn't much, but it was independence. Emma refined her curriculum based on feedback and needs she observed. She added modules on creating habitable space in vehicles, for women living in cars, making the most of shelter resources, legal rights and resources for abandoned women, improvising baby care with minimal supplies, maintaining hygiene and health without normal amenities, mental and emotional survival strategies, building community support networks. But Emma also added something unexpected. She started taking women back to the trailer. She'd negotiated with the property owner to keep using the trailer as a teaching site. Once a month, Emma would take a small group of women out to that empty trailer in the prairie and show them exactly how she'd survived. "This is where I was left," Emma would say, standing in the doorway. Empty. Nothing. It looked impossible. Then she'd walk them through every solution she'd found: the water source, the farmhouse with salvaged materials, the root cellar, the fire building technique, the improvised tools. "I want you to see that even from this, from literally nothing, you can build survival. You can create what you need. It won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. But it's possible." These field trips were transformative for participants. Seeing the actual place, understanding the reality of what Emma had faced and overcome, made her lessons tangible and believable. If Emma can survive this, participants would say to each other, I can survive my situation. The program Emma had created, she called it Phoenix Project, rising from nothing, began attracting attention beyond Nebraska. A journalist from NPR came to interview Emma and profile the program. The story aired nationally, reaching millions of people. The response was overwhelming. Women from across the country reached out wanting to attend Emma's workshops or learn her techniques. Organizations asked if she could train their staff. Foundations offered funding to expand the program. Emma was simultaneously thrilled and overwhelmed. Grace was still an infant, Emma was still recovering from her trauma, and suddenly she had a national platform. Teresa, the social worker who'd become Emma's mentor and friend, helped her navigate the rapid growth. "You need to think strategically," Teresa advised. "You can't personally teach every woman who needs this. But you can train others to teach your methods. You can create a curriculum that can be replicated." How do I do that? Start by documenting everything. Create a training manual. Then identify partner organizations in different cities who can host Phoenix Project workshops. Train facilitators to lead them. Scale the model. It seemed impossible. But Emma had done impossible before. Over the following months, Emma worked with Teresa and a small team of volunteers to create a comprehensive Phoenix Project curriculum. Detailed lesson plans, materials lists, facilitator training guides, participant workbooks. They piloted the Train the Trainer model with 3 organizations in other states: a women's shelter in Detroit, a homeless services agency in Phoenix, and a rural social services organization in Appalachia. The results were powerful. Facilitators who'd been trained by Emma reported that the program was transforming how their clients approached survival and problem-solving. Women who were completely shut down and hopeless are now actively problem-solving and finding creative solutions, reported the Detroit facilitator. Emma's story and methods give them a framework for action instead of despair. Phoenix Project began expanding rapidly. Emma trained facilitators in city after city. Each location adapted the program to local needs while maintaining the core principles Emma had developed. The program served women in urban poverty, rural isolation, domestic violence situations, homelessness, and post-incarceration reentry. Anywhere women faced the challenge of building life from minimal resources. Emma also became a reluctant public figure. She was invited to speak at conferences on poverty, homelessness, and women's issues. Her story was featured in magazines and news programs. She always felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not a hero," she'd insist. "I'm just someone who survived. And who wants other women to know survival is possible." But others saw her differently. They saw a woman who'd been left to die and had instead built something that was saving others. Jason's criminal trial became national news due to Emma's prominence. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison. At the sentencing, Emma gave a victim impact statement. She'd thought about what to say for weeks. "Jason tried to erase me," Emma said, looking directly at her ex-husband for the first time since he'd driven away from that trailer. "He took everything from me and left me in the most desperate circumstances imaginable, hoping I'd disappear. Through death or desperation, it didn't matter which. But I didn't disappear. I survived. And more than that, I took the absolute worst experience of my life and turned it into something that helps hundreds of women every year. Women who were facing their own impossible situations and who needed to know that survival is possible. So Jason, you failed. You tried to destroy me and instead you accidentally created something meaningful. The Phoenix Project exists because of what you did to me. Every woman we help is proof that your cruelty had the opposite effect you intended. I don't forgive you. I don't need to. You're irrelevant to my life now. But I want you to know that you lost. And I won." Jason showed no emotion during her statement. But Emma didn't care. She'd said what she needed to say. After the trial, Emma returned to her work with renewed focus. Grace was now a toddler, and Emma had built a stable life. Modest apartment, reliable income from Phoenix Project, a community of supportive friends and colleagues. But she kept thinking about that trailer. The place where she'd been abandoned. The place where she'd survived. The place where, in some strange way, She'd discovered who she really was. Emma made a decision. She contacted the property owner and made an offer to purchase the trailer and the surrounding land. "Why would you want to buy that?" the owner asked, baffled. "Because it's part of my story. And I want to make sure it can continue being part of other women's stories." Emma used donations and savings to buy the property. Then she began developing a vision for what it could become, something bigger than just a teaching site, something that could serve as the permanent home for the movement she'd accidentally started. Emma left the trailer exactly as it was, empty, bare, stark. The ultimate starting point of nothing. But on the surrounding prairie land, she built something extraordinary. With grants from foundations impressed by Phoenix Project's results, corporate sponsorships, and grassroots fundraising from the thousands of women whose lives had been touched by the program, Emma constructed Rising Ground Center. It wasn't just a retreat space. It was a complete ecosystem for transformation. The original trailer remained as the centerpiece, preserved exactly as Emma had found it, a monument to starting from nothing. 8 small living cabins for program participants, a central workshop building with classroom space and tools, a communal kitchen and dining hall, a childcare center, because many women in crisis had children. A resource library with computers and internet access, gardens where participants could learn to grow food, the restored farmhouse Emma had discovered, now converted into administrative offices. Rising Ground Center offered multiple program tracks. Emergency track, women in immediate crisis could come for intensive 2-week programs, receiving survival skills, resource connections, and immediate support. Development track, women who'd stabilized their immediate situations could return for month-long programs focused on education, job skills, and long-term planning. Leadership track, women who'd successfully transformed their lives could train to become Phoenix Project facilitators, turning their survival into service. The first full session at Rising Ground had 20 women and their children, 37 people total, all at different stages of crisis and recovery. Emma led the opening session in the workshop building. Grace, now 5, sat in the front row with other children. "Welcome to Rising Ground," Emma said. "This place exists because I was abandoned in that trailer you see outside. Left pregnant with nothing. No food, no water, no hope. I should have died. My daughter should have died. But we didn't. Because I refused to accept that nothing meant the end. I looked at that empty trailer, that dead prairie, those abandoned buildings, and I asked, what can I build from this? And I built survival. Then I built this place. And now, together, we're building futures for all of you." Emma walked the group out to the trailer. They stood in the empty space, some women crying, some angry, all understanding the power of what they were seeing. "This is ground zero," Emma said. "This is what nothing looks like. But nothing is actually everything. It's potential. It's possibility. It's a blank canvas. Each of you came here from your own version of this trailer. Your own nothing. Maybe it's a car you're living in. Maybe it's a shelter bed. Maybe it's a broken relationship or an empty bank account. Whatever your nothing is, I want you to know, it's not the end. It's the beginning." A woman named Diana raised her hand. "But how? I have 3 kids, no job, no education, no money. How do I build from that?" "The same way I did. One small solution at a time. One resource discovered. One skill learned. One connection made. You don't need to see the whole path. You just need to take the next step. And here's what I didn't have that you do have. You have this community. You have each other. You have facilitators who've walked this path. You have resources and knowledge. You're not starting alone like I was." The women absorbed this. Emma could see the shift happening, from despair to cautious hope, from "I can't" to "maybe I can." Over the following weeks, Emma watched transformations unfold. Diana, the woman with 3 kids and no resources, discovered she had a gift for organization. She began helping other women create systems and plans. By the end of her month at Rising Ground, she'd been offered a job with a property management company. A woman named Yolanda, who'd been living in her car, learned carpentry skills in the workshop. She discovered she loved building things with her hands. A local contractor hired her as an apprentice. Sandra, who'd fled domestic violence with her teenage daughter, found healing in the gardens. She began studying horticulture online using the resource library. She planned to start a small farm. Each woman's path was different. But they all shared one thing: they'd arrived believing they had nothing, and they were leaving knowing they had everything they needed to build the lives they wanted. Emma's book, Building from Nothing, a survival guide for women in crisis, was published and became an immediate bestseller. It reached beyond Emma's programs, providing tools and hope to women worldwide. The book tour took Emma to cities across the country. Everywhere she went, women lined up to share their stories, how they'd used Emma's techniques, how they'd survived their own impossible situations, how they'd transformed nothing into something. "You saved my life," woman after woman told Emma. "No," Emma would respond. "You saved your own life. I just showed you it was possible." Phoenix Project expanded to 42 cities. Rising Ground's model was replicated in 3 other states. Together, the programs were serving over 3,000 women annually. Emma was invited to the White House, where she briefed policymakers on poverty, women's issues, and effective intervention strategies. She testified before Congress. She consulted with the United Nations on global poverty initiatives. But she always returned to Rising Ground, to the trailer, to the work. Grace grew up immersed in this world of transformation. By the time she was 7, she understood that the trailer wasn't just where she was born, it was a symbol of resilience for thousands of women. "Mama, why do the ladies cry when they see the trailer?" Grace asked one day. "Because they see themselves in my story. They understand what it feels like to have nothing. And seeing that I survived from that nothing gives them hope that they can survive their own nothing." So the trailer is important. Very important. It's proof that the worst thing that ever happened to me became the best thing, because it taught me who I really am, and it gave me the purpose of helping others. When I grow up, I want to help people too. Then you will. But in your own way. You don't have to follow my path. You get to create your own. Grace thought about this seriously. "But I like your path. You turn sad things into happy things." Emma hugged her daughter. "That's called transformation, baby. And yes, that's what we do here." A decade after being abandoned in the trailer, Emma stood at Rising Ground during the center's anniversary celebration. Over 500 people attended: current participants, alumni, facilitators, supporters, donors, and partners. Teresa, now Emma's co-director and closest friend, stood with her watching the gathering. "Do you remember when you first told me you wanted to teach women survival skills?" Teresa asked. "I thought it was a good idea. I had no idea it would become this." "Neither did I. I just knew I couldn't let my experience be for nothing. If I suffered that much and didn't use it to help others, then Jason would have won. He definitely didn't win. Look at this." Teresa gestured at the crowd: women laughing, children playing, facilitators teaching workshops, volunteers serving food. "This is what winning looks like." Emma's eyes found the trailer in the distance. Still empty, still preserved, still the heart of everything. "That trailer saved me," Emma said. "Not because it provided shelter, it barely did that. But because it forced me to discover I was capable of more than I ever imagined. It stripped away everything except what truly mattered: the will to survive and the creativity to build from nothing. And now it's saving thousands of others by showing them the same thing." At the celebration, Emma was presented with an award from the governor recognizing her work. But the speech Emma gave wasn't about accolades. "This award belongs to every woman who ever stood in impossible circumstances and refused to give up," Emma said. "To every mother who found a way to feed her children with nothing in the cupboard. To every survivor who left with only the clothes on her back and built a new life. To every woman who looked at her nothing and saw possibility. Jason abandoned me in that trailer hoping I'd disappear. But I'm standing here today, visible, vocal, and helping thousands of women become visible too. Women society tried to ignore. Women the system failed. Women who were told they were nothing. We're not nothing. We're everything. We're survivors, builders, creators, transformers. And together, we're proving that nothing is really just the raw material for something extraordinary. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly 10 minutes. After the ceremony, Emma walked out to the trailer alone. She did this regularly, returning to the place where everything had changed. She stepped inside the empty space and sat on the floor where she'd given birth to Grace. The metal walls still bore scorch marks from the small fire she'd built. The floor still had stains from that difficult birth. Emma closed her eyes and remembered. The terror of being abandoned. The desperation of early labor pains with no help coming. The primal determination to keep herself and Grace alive. The moment she decided to walk for help, not knowing if she'd make it. All of it had led to this. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the empty trailer. "For breaking me open so I could discover what I was really made of. For showing me that everything I needed was already inside me. For giving me a story that helps other women find their own strength." A voice interrupted her reverie. "Mama." Grace stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the prairie sunset behind her. "Hi, baby. Come here." Grace came and sat beside Emma on the floor. "Were you talking to the trailer?" "Sort of. Remembering. Being grateful. For being left here. Not for being abandoned. That was terrible and cruel. But for what I discovered about myself here. For the strength I found. For the purpose I built from the worst thing that ever happened to me. Daddy tried to hurt you, but he accidentally helped you? In a way. He tried to destroy me. But you can't destroy someone by stripping away everything external. Because what really matters, the strength, the creativity, the will to survive, those are internal. Those can't be taken away." Grace leaned against her mother. "I'm glad you didn't give up." "Me too, baby. Me too." They sat together in the empty trailer as the light faded, mother and daughter, both living proof that nothing was really everything waiting to happen. Outside, Rising Ground Center glowed with lights and life. Inside the trailer, Emma and Grace sat in the peaceful dark, honoring the nothing that had become everything. 15 years after the abandonment, Phoenix Project operated in 63 cities across 9 countries. Rising Ground had expanded to 5 locations in the United States and had inspired similar centers internationally. Emma had helped train over 400 facilitators. Phoenix Project had served more than 15,000 women and their children. Grace, now a teenager, had decided to study social work. "I want to understand trauma and transformation academically," she told Emma. "So I can make the programs even better. You don't have to follow in my footsteps." "I'm not following. I'm building on what you started." "That's different." Emma smiled. Her daughter understood the principle perfectly. Take what exists and build something new from it. Jason was released from prison after serving his full sentence. He tried to contact Emma once, through a lawyer, asking for forgiveness and a chance to know Grace. Emma's response was brief. "No. You made your choice 15 years ago. Grace and I have built a life without you. We don't need anything from you. Move on with your life as we've moved on with ours." She never heard from him again. One autumn afternoon, Emma stood on the prairie land looking at a new construction project, an expansion of Rising Ground that would double their capacity. Teresa joined her. "You know what amazes me? None of this existed 15 years ago. This land was empty except for that trailer. And now look at it." "It's not really about the buildings," Emma said. "The buildings are just tools. What we've really built is proof. Proof that starting with nothing doesn't determine where you end up. Proof that the worst circumstances can produce the most meaningful outcomes. Proof that transformation is always possible. You gave women hope. I gave them evidence. Hope without evidence is just wishful thinking. But when you show someone concrete proof, like this center, like the thousands of women who've transformed their lives, like my own story, then hope becomes believable. Actionable. A new group of women was arriving for their first day at Rising Ground. Emma watched them get off the bus, scared, uncertain, carrying small bags that contained all they owned. She'd been exactly where they were. She knew how they felt. Emma walked toward them, Grace beside her, both ready to welcome these women to the place where nothing became everything. "Welcome to Rising Ground," Emma said to the group. "You're safe here. You're valued here. And you're about to discover something powerful. You're capable of so much more than you currently believe." She gestured toward the trailer. "See that? That's where I was abandoned, pregnant, with nothing. That's where I should have died. Instead, it's where I discovered I could survive anything. And that's where you're going to discover the same thing about yourselves. Your nothing is about to become something. Let's begin." And they did. Another group of women, another round of transformation, another proof that Emma's story wasn't just about her survival. It was about all of them. Every woman who'd ever started from nothing and built something. Every survivor who'd refused to stay a victim. Every person who'd turned their worst day into their greatest purpose. The empty trailer stood at the center of Rising Ground, a monument to nothing. But surrounding it was everything: buildings, gardens, programs, community, thousands of transformed lives. Jason had tried to erase Emma by leaving her with nothing. Instead, he'd given her the perfect starting point for building everything. And Emma had built something that would outlast them all. A movement proving that nothing was really just another word for infinite possibility. The end. For every woman who was left with nothing and built everything. For every person who transformed their trauma into purpose. For every survivor who refused to let their worst moment define them. You are proof that nothing is temporary, but transformation is permanent.